our third Zoom Art Salon, since we're online these days. And we have such a treasure of artists to choose from. We're gonna continue this. So tonight we have three wonderful people presenting, and it will be Heidi Alonzo, Randie Silverstein, and John Babcock. During the presentations, everyone will be muted as you are now, just to give them an opportunity to be uninterrupted. And then after each presentation, we'll open up the mics so you can comment about their work, their presentations, and ask questions. We'll do that for each artist. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's get going. It's an honor to, I lost Heidi. It's an honor to introduce our first artist, Heidi Alonzo. Heidi is primarily a painter. Her beautifully executed work is narrative and representational, and it also includes her interest in words and mathematics, telling stories of the interconnectedness of all things. Heidi's colorful renditions often present like a waking dream, her imagery portraying spirituality and magical realism, with an understanding of the multi-layered realms of human existence. Her quest is to visually explore those all-inclusive moments that shape a person's time on this planet. So there we go. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here. And I will begin. I have set my timer so that I won't go over time. So welcome everybody. I'm glad to see all of you tonight. And just a little bit of introduction. I've been an artist living in Santa Cruz since I was a kid. And I grew up here and moved to Watsonville in the mid-90s. And I've been creating art based on the land, based on our region, based on the people. These two pieces, I'm going to start from early on, from when I first moved to Watsonville. These were my first two real Watsonville pieces. They depict scenes in Watsonville, including the Virgin that appeared in the tree, the Virgin of Guadalupe in Pinto Lake. And I like to inject, as you heard in my introduction, a little bit of magic realism. I also like to focus on people, places, and products of Watsonville. So I did a series of products, mainly agricultural products. Of course, the artichoke is from Castroville, but it's regional. And Martinelli's apple cider, of course, Martinelli's is based in Watsonville. And the background of these pieces are enlarged designs from bandanas, which meant to honor the field workers. And of course, Watsonville is known as the strawberry capital of the world. And not that many people know that it used to be, we used to grow a lot of lettuce here. We still do. Mainly the Japanese people grew lettuce. I also did a series of places of Watsonville, and these were painted after the earthquake when Watsonville was trying to revitalize its downtown. And I painted a series of iconic places, partly to bring attention to the plight of merchants who are the building owners who couldn't bring businesses into their buildings. And I also wanted to highlight Watsonville because it's a beautiful place. It's kind of like a little hidden gem, I think, in Santa Cruz County. There's a lot of amazing finds in Watsonville, and that's what I intended these series of watercolors to highlight. So sadly, most of the restaurants that I have been highlighting in these watercolors are now closed, but the watercolors remain, and I hope that they bring happy memories to people who see them and know the places. So these were all watercolor. I did commissions also. The piece on the lower left is actually a recent piece of the William L. Jeffson building, which is in the industrial section of Watsonville. And I actually get very nostalgic looking at these pieces because like the piece on the upper right, Ritmo Latino, the business is no longer there. I began to become interested in papel picado, which is actually cut paper that's strung on a banner that is used during fiestas and holidays for the Latino culture. And I decided that I wanted to create, incorporate scenes that used the idea of papel picado, but kind of with a twist. You can't find these in any banners, but I wanted to combine the idea of papel picado with my focus of Watsonville. And of course, bringing in elements such as Jose Guadalupe Posada, which is the Mexican soldier kissing his woman, images of fiestas and the dancers that you see here. Watsonville was really my main focus for a long time. And I started doing not just scenes of Watsonville, but I started doing commercial work and graphic work for local businesses and for the Watsonville Public Library. Now this piece is based on a trip that my husband and I took to China. And when we were there, he's Latino, or he was Latino. He actually passed away 5 years ago, but he had this amazing experience in China, noticing that the culture was very similar to Latino culture. And at that time, he started writing about growing up as a young Mexican kid in East LA. And I started doing a series of illustrations for his book, of which the Chicano in China, the last piece, and this piece were for. This illustration was for a story that he wrote called Stomp the Silver Dollar. And at that time, I did this piece. I include this piece because I sold it early in like the 1990s. And I was recently contacted by the current owner. He would like for me to find a public place to permanently hang this. And I told him that I would take a look. So I'm just kind of throwing that out to the group in case anybody has any ideas. And then the next series of work, I did a series on the Yangtze River in China from that trip that I mentioned earlier. And this is the Hutong Gorge. Absolutely amazing place. I went the year that the dam was being built. So this scene no longer exists. In fact, the water is probably about a third of the way up from where you see the river line right now. So much of this scene here is underwater and does not exist as it was before, which is kind of heartbreaking. But all of these series of the Yangtze River were mainly commissions. I did one, and then somebody wanted one, and then somebody else. It kind of started a wave. So I did about 4 or 5 of them, which are showing now. And each time that I did one of these scenes, it's a little bit difficult to see, but I started hiding animals in the water. Usually dragons, sometimes horses. And unfortunately, these pictures were taken before digital cameras were very good, so the quality is too poor to really zoom in to show you. But I do have a piece later on in this presentation where I've hidden some figures, and then I have a little key to show you how I do it and where they go. So I think I have 2 more Yangtze River series. This piece, I wrote a poem on the top that was written on the top of a pagoda in this city. The city is Yueyang, And you walked to the top of the pagoda, and they had a scroll which had these characters on it, and the characters mean the sky and the water are the same color. And I thought that was so beautiful that I decided to do a painting about it. And this scene here is the city of Wuhan. And I believe this is called the Big Goose Piccolo. I could be mistaken about that. But I incorporated panels on the top and the bottom in a lot of my works and put other stories in there. Now, this is the piece that I was talking about. It has hidden figures in the tree. And in the next slide, you're actually going to see the sketch that I did before I put all of the color in, so you could see where all of the figures are hidden. But this is another piece I did of the Virgin of Guadalupe that appeared in the tree in Pinto Lake. And this is the sketch before I filled it in with color. And you could see that there are different figures in the tree, and they're still there. This piece is hanging in the Watsonville Public Library and right behind the circulation desk. And you could go there if you have time when they reopen and take a look for those figures. I did a series of posters for Watsonville. I did the Santa Cruz County Fair poster in 2003, and the piece on the right I created for Pajaro Valley Health Trust for their evening of wine and roses. And that followed with several Strawberry Festival posters. I've put 2 of them here. I think I did a total of 4 or 5 Strawberry Festival posters until until Priscilla Martinez, who's a fabulous, amazing artist, started doing the posters after me. So these were a lot of fun to do. After that, I did a series based on pan dulce, and those are the Mexican sweetbreads that you could find in the bakeries around Watsonville. This was kind of an idea of my husband's. He kept telling me, you need to paint pan dulce because they're delicious, they look beautiful, each one is shaped differently, and there's a story behind each one of these breads. Most of the breads are cooked, or there are certain breads that are cooked only for the Day of the Dead, and you can only find them cooked around the months of October, November, and they're usually flavored with orange. But some of the breads are called conchas, which means shells because they look like shells. That's a pink concha on the left. The skull piece is one of the pan de muerto, which is a Day of the Dead bread. Those are one of the breads that you can only find around that time of year. The piece on the lower right is a little shape of a pig. They call it el puerco for the little pig. Now, in 2015, this is a portrait of my husband, and sadly he passed away. But when he did, that really affected how I thought about my work and what I'd been creating. And that's when I thought that I would like to focus more on storytelling and lyricism and mysticism. So I did this piece shortly thereafter. This piece is based on the Rialto Bridge in Venice, and it is based on actually a lucky photograph that I took at the time where I caught this bird in flight looking down this scene. Of course, I've changed the street vendors to become water, and there were 2 butterflies hidden in the water. I also, at that time, began to get interested in geometry and math, and I started basing my designs on equilateral triangles and creating patterns within them and seeing how they interconnect and how could I create art based on the patterns that those triangles make. So the next series of pieces were really kind of experiments. These were the first rudimentary tries of working out triangle patterns and seeing what type of art I can make. So these are fairly small. They're about 15 by 19 inches. And I have a koi on the left, a fritillary butterfly on the right. I did, been working a few more. I like putting insects in my work, and you may have noticed a number of them. I like the idea of finding beauty in something that may be repulsive, that or something that somebody may be afraid of. That idea interests me. So, I every now and then will include insects in my work. These were two pieces that I actually did recently. These were more experiments on how I can use a repeat pattern. I like how this pattern making resembles fabric. Now here's a good example of how I make the patterns. What I'll do is I'll take a triangle and I'll draw a design within it and then scan it and create a mirror image. And when you combine the three sides of the triangle, you get the pattern that emerges. And it's really fun to do this because you don't always know exactly how the pattern is going to turn out. So here's, this is kind of a memorial piece. This is a hat that my husband used to always wear, and he loved the color of poppies. So I'm still trying to tell stories. I still want to tell the story of somebody's life. What meaning did their life have? Now this is a shout out to my mom. She grew this rose and she's here watching tonight. So hi mom, I know you like this piece, but, but I was still experimenting with the patterning in the background and figuring out how I can make it look a little more organic, maybe less patterned. So I started experimenting with putting the pattern within silhouettes and figures. And this is actually 4 separate designs in a triangle that I designed to interlock with each other so that I could combine different designs with not the same pattern all the time, that I could make it look different but still controlled. And this was a piece that I did about 2 years ago. It's still using the patterning in the sky, but I'm kind of exploring. This is a self-portrait, and I'm kind of exploring now, looking into my future. I'm trying to tell the story that I've had some difficulties in the past, but I'm moving on. I'm going forward. I did this piece about a year ago, and this piece does have the patterning, but it's in the lower right-hand corner in the coral. And I think I successfully created a pattern that doesn't look like it repeats unless you're looking for that repeat pattern. And the blue whale, this was both of these pieces with the jellies and the blue whale, they were about our environment and how we're not really taking care of it right now. And I was thinking a lot about all of the plastics that we use and how it's affecting our wildlife, and wanted to do some pieces based on the beauty of the ocean and animals. And then this piece I put in because it's a series that's just starting. I have a series of poetry that I wrote when I was a teenager, and I always wanted to illustrate the poems. And this is the first one of the series, and there are more to come. So moving forward, I decided I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, but I decided that I would go back to school and get a Master of Fine Arts. I have a master's in teaching, so I'm getting a second master's. I'm ending my first year. This was my first piece that I painted I've been attending San Jose State University. And this is kind of a piece that bridges what I did in the past and what I'm doing now. This was the second piece that I painted for San Jose State. And I'm still using the patterning and I'm still using the storytelling, but I'm trying to maybe change the way that I paint. I feel that my work in the past was very illustrative, and I want to see if I can move it in a different direction. So I'm still storytelling here. This piece was based on a story that my husband had written, and I beginning to go into abstraction a little bit by bisecting the sky and making different planes with the patternings. And then over the summer, when the pandemic hit, of course, our lives have changed. So I did these next two paintings based on self-isolating. I live by myself, and my only contact with people is through Zoom or seeing my neighbors walk by. So I did a couple of paintings based on the isolation. Boys, sorry, my dogs are growling, but I would take walks, and I started taking a lot of pictures of telephone poles around my neighborhood. So I started doing a lot of pictures of telephone poles. I kind of became obsessed with them. And I kind of think that they are, yeah, you'll see in a minute how obsessed I became with telephone poles. I started this series of work in September. And I believe that through our pandemic right now, telephone poles are a symbol to me of connectivity, because boys, the only way we can safely communicate with each other at this time is through social media, Zoom, such as we're doing now. It's unsafe to gather in groups, and especially at this particular moment, it's getting very unsafe. So telephone poles. I was also studying, I'm taking currently an abstraction and a drawing class. So my work, I've been exploring abstraction, and I've been doing a lot of sketching. And sketching is really one of my first loves. I love to draw. And I feel like right now it's my time to experiment and try many, many different things. So this was done for my drawing class, which coincidentally ended today. And these were more works. I'm kind of moving away from the telephone phase and more about thinking about what's the meaning of life. And that's kind of what these pictures are about. They are partly based on images of my husband, but I'm also thinking about what happens after we're here. I know that the memory of a person lives on, but what really happens? So I'm just kind of exploring that idea with these sketches. And the sketch on the upper left is actually working out what I wanted to do this painting on. And I don't know if you can see on your end, but I started using the patterning again in the center of the tree. And this was based on a trip that I took to Rome. And we had an amazing time in this park searching for a secret garden called Bitter Oranges. And that was what the last painting was based on. And I'm still experimenting with the patterning and new materials. This is a small drawing that's drawn on Duraline, which is a transparent paper. You could see through it. So this is actually one drawing. You could see both sides. And I drew the pattern, and then I painted on either side. I also experimented with monoprints, and we had a speaker come in on Zoom, and we all had a Zoom monoprint session, which was really fun. And I enjoyed these quite a bit. It's probably not the direction I will go in, but anything that you do differently gives you ideas about what you want to do going forward. I also experimented with watercolor on Duraline, and not only is it transparent, but the paint doesn't soak in to the paper. It sits on the surface. So you could do all of these wonderful things, mixing and melding of watercolor colors and pressing different mediums. So that led me to what I'm currently interested in, is painting on wood and adding sculptural elements into the wood. And this is a really big departure, but I think that going back to school and pushing myself through all of these mediums is leading me in a direction that I think is really interesting. So this particular piece is also on wood, and it's wood that's been sliced like deli meats, so that you could use the wood grain as an integral part of the entire piece. And I also see a tie-in to what I was doing before with the patterns, because when you cut these pieces apart, you can still see the mirror image. And when you place them together, it's very much like what I was doing before in drawing and painting. So there's only one more piece after this. And I'm really excited about what I can do further. This piece here, okay, so this is my last piece. I actually finished this just a couple of days ago. And it's a good place to stop because I see a lot of possibility and I have a lot of ideas, and I wouldn't mind just stopping here and opening up the floor to any questions that anybody may have.
All right, thank you. I just unmuted everybody, so if you can stop sharing your screen so we can see you. Heidi?
Heidi, that was just a beautiful display of your commitment and your expertise,
Great, Heidi.
using so many parts of yourself to make so much, many, many beautiful pieces. I love that you're continuing to explore and using what you've gathered along the way to keep going forward. Very wonderful to see.
Let's give a hand to Heidi, because that everybody is
Hey, Heidi.
I love the telephone poll series too, Heidi. Such a wonderful group.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing that I haven't mentioned is that I am taking also, just for fun, this is just the way I am. I feel that you should always be a lifelong learner. But I was introduced to digital media and digital media arts last semester, and I thought, I need to do this. I need to try this. So I've been taking a digital media arts class, and I've learned, I'm learning how to code and to build a website. And I'm currently working on a website that displays my telephone pole pictures, but so that they combine and repeat in mirror symmetry. And it's kind of fun.
How great.
Heidi, I have a question.
Sure.
And it's in the very last two, I believe, or this is, I'm wondering how you install those, if those fit into a kind of frame, which we couldn't see.
Okay.
But how do you stick all those things together?
Thank you. And this is Jane talking, right? Hi, Jane.
Hi, Heidi. Good job tonight.
Thank you. Well, I thought about it for a while. I'm very, very fortunate in that I've been a picture framer for 35 years, and I have all of my own tools, and I know how to build things. So what I've been doing for these pieces is I'm cutting, they're small, by the way. The largest one is only 16 by 20. So I've been cutting wood and gluing, I've been using liquid nails and gluing each piece onto the board, and then putting a bar on the back of the board with a wire so that it actually floats off the wall and it doesn't need a frame.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
that's like wonderful.
Wow.
Good question.
Heidi, I have a question.
Okay, Larry.
You had a recent picture of, I think it was the Jefferson Building.
Yes.
Was that an old apple barn?
You know,
Because
interesting.
I know there's.
I know that right now it's an industrial arts building. They have a lot of, there's a metal shop in there, and it's a lot of metal cutting equipment and welding going on. But I know that the current owner inherited the building from his father. So he didn't really tell me the history that much about it, but the next time I see him, I can ask.
I know there are several old apple barns in Watsonville.
It certainly has that shape, and it's in the area where there were apple orchards around there, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, it's near Grove Street, and I do believe that Duncan Shin, who was a resident in Watsonville, wrote he published a book based on growing up in Watsonville, and he did a lot of sketches, and he talked about the apple drying sheds that were around that area. So it could have been. Randie, hi.
I really love I love all of your work, but the last couple of pieces, I was so taken with how the actual grain of the wood becomes like this organic pattern.
Yes.
And I really love that. It really works so well. And I didn't realize what I was seeing until the continuation of the theme and bringing it into the wood. I just think it works so well for that.
Thank you very much. I have the advantage of having been a picture framer for so long. I've literally cut thousands and thousands of wood frames, and I've often noticed the wood grain pattern, and it's kind of stuck in the back of my mind for years that this could be a possible art medium utilizing the grain of the wood. And I just had the perfect excuse to do it, taking classes again. I only caught a few words unfortunately, of what you said, but I heard you say storytelling, and the tree. So were you asking a question about the birds in the tree with the patterning, or?
Am I any better now?
Yes, that's a lot better.
The ring of the tree, how it's each year, it's like the story of the tree. Loved it.
Oh, that's true. I didn't think about that. Each ring does tell the story of the tree. That's a really nice, thank you for saying that. I can use that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that was just great. Really, really great, Heidi, to see the whole bulk of your work and to see your progression and your direction. Thank you so much. Beautiful, beautiful pieces.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening.
To view the bright and light capturing creations of our next artist, Randie Silverstein. Primarily a glass artist, Randie has enjoyed a career in ceramics and in graphic design, both of which led her to experimenting with the exciting possibilities of firing glass. Her work is described as whimsical, colorful, and light, with imagery that explores celestial bodies and earthly landscapes, often enjoying the playful relationship between the two. Focused on color, translucency, and pattern, she continues to experiment with the materials and the relationship with light, her inspiration often coming from the qualities of the glass itself. So now we have the joy of watching what Randie has to tell us.
You know, everybody keep your fingers crossed that my internet stays good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rosie, for that introduction, and to Heidi for coming before me, and Hedwig for hosting it. What a great opportunity this is. I'm going to tell you about my work. Let me share the screen. Okay. Okay. That's me. Okay, so this is a little about me. That's me in my studio. I'm primarily an object maker. Right now I work in kiln formed glass. I grew up in New York City and have lived many places, but Santa Cruz I've lived since 1990. So I've been in and out of here a couple of times. When I was in college, I was very interested in geology, archaeology, and decorative ancient art. It's no surprise I ended up in ceramics. I have always been interested in integrity of materials and the way objects weather time. I went to art school in New York's Hudson River Valley, just out of New York City, and received a BFA in ceramics in the mid-'80s. I studied digital media at Cabrillo in the late 90s and taught there for a few semesters while running my web design company. In 2002, we moved to Denver, where I really longed for community. I was used to having studio partners, and I took up a ceramics class at the local community college and was introduced to glass by a teacher there, Kathy Holt. This was a good thing because by then I couldn't think of another thing to make in clay. This is me in my home garage glass studio. I have a large studio kiln that these days seems way too small. In glass, I'm mostly self-taught and find myself mostly limited by my tools, not my ideas. I'm going to share my work starting with clay and moving to glass. This is a series of vessels that grew out of my BFA senior thesis. They're coil built in the Native American tradition of laying the coils into a bowl form and gradually adding coils and paddling them into shape. Their forms and colors were inspired by my first cross-country trip to New Mexico, responding to the geological formations and colors of the desert. The surfaces remain unglazed but airbrushed with a colored slip or liquid clay. Like sedimentary rock frozen over time and worn away with exposure, the plasticity of the clay is evident in the textures picked up by both the coil process and the paddle that used to shape the pot. Eventually, my graphic tendency crept in and I began to carve the leather hard clay with decorative patterns. These pots were created in my 20s when I lived in Seattle, Washington, where I relocated after college. I moved to Santa Cruz the year after the earthquake and then took a trip to Thailand in 1995. These wall pieces are my version of Southeast Asian spirit houses. They are little shrines to the protective spirit of a place. I was very much taken with how each home in Thailand had one displayed, some ornate and others very plain. They seemed to reflect the family that dwelled within. Mine speak of several cultures, each with its traditional pottery form hanging in the window or doorway. This body of work is my first foray into whimsy and is much more concerned with color and line than form. Petroglyph Ceramic Lounge, which is in downtown Santa Cruz, opened in the early 90s, and in 97 they hired me to run their warehouse and manufacturing of bisqueware that you would paint at the lounge. I didn't have a studio of my own at that time, and so I started using their commercial underglazes to paint on my pieces. I employed a Majolica Italian brush stroke technique and also started using the material as if it was watercolor. By soaking the porous bisqueware in water before applying the glaze, I got a similar effect of wetting the paper as in watercolor. I really was only interested in using the plates as a canvas for my painting. I was really not interested in form whatsoever. The content of these and much of the work at this time was of ordinary things, of common objects, of home, of safe places, and of expression of joy. These chairs and wall vases would be my last series in clay. This body of work is my exploration of anthropomorphic properties of pots and chairs. When we speak about pots, we often refer to the parts of the body, the lip, the neck, the belly, and the foot. In this series, I'm making reference to the vessel nature of our bodies. When I started making glass things, I started slumping the glass into forms to make plates and trays. It seemed natural to start with utilitarian objects. Fusing is the first firing, and after the composition is created, it is fused in the kiln at 1490 degrees Fahrenheit. Slumping is a second, lower temperature firing where the fused piece is placed on a ceramic mold and fired to a slightly lower temperature. Ultimately, gravity allows it to take the shape of the mold. Here, my only concerns were for color, line, and shape. My pieces were very graphic, and I attempt to create the shapes I want. I started using components like murini and dots in my work as decorative elements, but I'm still looking for more movement in the compositions. Most of this first work was created while living in Colorado. When we moved back to Santa Cruz in 2001, I mostly focused on these panel designs. I was no longer interested in the vessel whatsoever, but that brought new problems to solve, like displaying the upright panels. This is about the time I start to collaborate with wood and metal artists to display the work. I also started loosening up on the tight graphic style and allowed myself to pile up scraps of glass and take advantage of the fusing process to achieve a more painterly look. And really letting the glass talk to me. The deep variations within each piece of factory sheet glass would speak to me, and I often go in search of the perfect part of it for the panel. This is my longest running series of work to date, The Suns and the Moons. These suns were a similar exploration to the moons. I started to break the boundary of the rectangle and feel more comfortable with the glass. Here I start to pre-fire sun components and use vitrograph stringer, a glass string that literally comes out of a hot kiln to maintain the whimsy that I seek in the work. The stringer isn't available commercially, and I commissioned other glass artists to create it for me. This piece, named Gravity, was my first real major glass piece. It brings together concepts I had been exploring and reflects the relationship of gravity and celestial bodies. It's the first piece I made that was not an earthly landscape, but rather spoke of the cosmos. I made this piece about the portal between this life and the next, between earthly existence and that of the other. In this piece, the house stands with steps up to a doorway that opens to the heavens, galaxies, and other worlds. I was no longer satisfied with the small work. I needed to work bigger. I had several challenges with that, including the size of my kiln shelf and the display. Display solutions literally kept me up at night. Finally, I created a way to hang the work by hand fabricating an aluminum channel frame that utilizes stainless steel gripper and cable system. This was a very elegant solution that I ended up using in my current suspended disc installations. And I had to learn how to work with metal, which was a real challenge for me. I had not been taught how to do that. The panel on the left uses a stand constructed by a sculptor when the commercial stands I was using no longer really protected the panels. This was a commission piece that I made for a picture window that was beyond the size of my kiln. Creating a 3-panel set sandwiched by the aluminum channel frame allowed me to work bigger. Okay, this was kind of a transitional piece, obscured by clouds. This piece taught me about the glass's interplay with light. This was a happy accident that happened. My use of both translucent and opaque glasses up till now had been solely intuitive. I made this piece and hung it in my living room in the afternoon. I was disappointed that the moon shape seemed to all but disappear in that light. As it got dark out that evening, we noticed that the moon reappeared as if by magic. The translucency of the glass allows the color to blend with that which is behind it, while the opalescent glasses reflect the light and color back into the room if there's a light on. As the light changes, so does the piece. The mixture of translucent and opaque color is the magic that makes this work special. This piece foreshadows the lighting effects I create with my disc series. The same with this piece, the same sort of things. Ooh, why is that so small? There we go. Okay, so this piece represented a real departure for me. What happened was, in June of 2018, I got an email from Stephanie Bailey, a physics professor at UCSC. She was putting together a program for her students to collaborate with some local artists to help them practice communication and creativity. It would be a year-long program culminating with an exhibit of artists' work where we were to have responded visually to the science our student was studying. 26-year-old physics PhD candidate Alex McDaniel chose me as my work resonated with him. This is my piece from the Blitzer Gallery show in March 2019. It's called We Are Stardust, because as Carl Sagan so eloquently puts it, everything we are made of comes from collapsing stars. When I asked Alex if I could look through the telescope up at UCSC, he told me he didn't do that kind of thing. He told me he analyzed data from satellite telescopes. Well, that sounded pretty dry, and so I brought him into my studio, and that's where we established a rapport. Alex studies dark matter, an elusive particle that doesn't interact with light, yet they say it makes up 85% of the matter in the universe. There's no evidence of this particle except the inference of it by its gravitational signature. Physicists use both astrophysical observations and particle colliders in an attempt to record it. Great. I had to respond visually to something I can't see. I chose to use the glass and its spectrum of color to represent two concepts of vastly different scales. One subatomic in nature, the other cosmological. The glass disc represents the transformation of mass into light photon energy. Like particles colliding in space, the emissions that these collisions release as light radiating outward in all directions. The negative space or void represents the dark matter or invisible mass. We met for most of the year and I wrote a lot about it, which you can read on my website at randiesilverstein.com in my blog section. The Blitzer show opened on a first Friday in March and had over 500 people in attendance, 17 artists. It was an amazing thing to witness, all this beautiful work and all this science. So I had the concept about the piece I wanted to do, but not the logistics on how to do this. I was sitting in my doctor's office one day in the waiting room and picked up an Andy Goldworthy book he had in the office, and I opened to these pages. What Andy was doing with reeds was sort of the concept I was looking for. He was creating a void within a construct and literally creating the shape of the void by filling the space around it. I saw such a big similarity, and so I couldn't wait to get back to the studio and try it with glass stringer. I had a couple of problems though. Glass needs mass to stay together. So it needed to be on a sheet of glass, which I tried first. If I fired them without that, they would be too fragile to be useful. So I tried it on blue, didn't seem right. Tried it on black, while might that might seem like a void, it really isn't. So the solution that worked was to lay in frit, which is ground glass, between the stringers to make it strong. In the bottom picture you'll see on the left are the stringers just laying on the shelf. And then after the fire, with a little bit of frit poured in there, all the stringers were able to stay together. And then in order to make the disc shape, I brought it to my saw and made it round. Back to the interplay with two types of glasses, I chose to use opaque stringer and translucent frit to give the illusion of the stringers floating. So then, don't you know it, all of a sudden, this is what I see all around me. It's kind of like buying a car and then that's the car you see around town. But it just was unbelievable. So this slide is just for fun. So then I needed to create a prototype. So in creating a prototype for my discs, I wanted the energy patterns to be varied. So I tried several ways of making the stringer. Number one, bending the commercially available stringer with a flame. Then I made a clay mold and slumped the stringer in the kiln. And then finally, I commissioned 2 artists in Texas to create vitrograph stringer in the colors that I needed. This gave me that lyrical line I was looking for, that whimsy that I was looking for. And so then I went out and bought a couple of round kiln shelves. And basically what I do now is I work right on the kiln shelf, lay the stringer around an inner ring and pile it all up in a coordinated manner around a center ring. So this is a picture of the entire installation at the Blitzer Gallery. The piece is created of 9 hanging, suspended, and 3 wall discs. The hanging discs are suspended from the 19-foot ceiling. I built a stage for the lighting and to establish a floor boundary for the piece. The lights rotate in hue and intensity between red, green, and blue in various sequences, making beautiful dancing colored moon shadows on the wall and the ceiling. Okay, so this is an anemone cluster it's a wall disc composition of varying heights off the wall and diameters. This I call Lambda Cluster. Lambda is a type of subatomic particle. This piece consists of a 20-inch disc, a 14-inch disc, and a 12-inch bowl form. Here's some more wall discs of varying colors and sizes. So last year, I put up a show at Oswald Restaurant. That was really fun. It was my first kind of commercial hanging, commercial installation. This year, they invited me back last year and I wasn't sure how it was gonna go, but they did invite me back and this year's show went in yesterday. And because we're back in purple with no dine inside, I've recreated a fabulous light show there. It will be up for 3 months. It's on a timer until midnight. The next 2 slides are my Photoshop creations of my next imagined installations. Of course, my kiln is not this big, but Photoshop doesn't mind that. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with this little movie I made of We Are Stardust at the gallery last year. I put it to a little music. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you'll go to the Oswald installation this holiday season and see that.
I unmuted everybody. Thank you.
Yay, well done, well done.
Thank you.
Yay.
Very nice, Randy. So you went from earth to the sky.
Exactly.
Beautiful, very beautiful. Curious about your next direction. What's in store?
Well, what's in store for me is I'm really, I don't know if I should give away my secret, but there's only about 30 of us here. So I am flirting around with Kirk McNeil, who is a local forger. And the two of us are trying to collaborate on a project to present to the MA for their big replacement for their Glow Festival next September. And so I have in mind a forged tree with glass leaves and doing a tree of life theme. So it's all in my head and on paper. That's what's happening right now, is my next installation.
Sounds exciting.
Thank you.
Seems like you're very successful in following your dreams.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
very
you.
interesting. No one's ever said that to me before.
Randy, how heavy are those the hanging discs?
Who's saying that? Who's talking?
Me, Danny, her
Oh,
cousin.
Danny, hi, sorry. Well, they're probably 3 to 5 pounds. They're really thin. And actually, I'm building up on the shelf and gauging what the thickness would be. I'm starting to make them a little thicker now, make them a little more durable. But they don't weigh that much. They're really very light.
They look like they'd be much heavier than that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. But you
They're
know,
really beautiful.
last word.
Well, it's going to enjoy seeing your light show in Santa Cruz at Oswald's.
So it was kind of it was happy accident for me, not so much for Damani, the owner. Beautiful, wonderful restaurant. If you guys haven't eaten there, while they're still doing outdoor dining, you should go do that if you feel safe about it. It gave me the opportunity to actually do a window display and have lights shining into the restaurant where it wouldn't have been that appropriate with customers sitting there. So when the show was going to go in about 2 weeks ago, we were going purple like the next day. And so I think Janet's on, right? Janet, you're here somewhere. I talked with Janet and I said, can we maybe we should rethink that light show thing. So she let me go for it. And it's really kind of cool. Everybody for listening.
Thank you so much, Randy. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you,
so much.
Randy. That was really beautiful.
Thanks for having me.
Randy, it was great to see
you.
art
Thank-
progression. Loved it.
Thanks,
Randy.
Janet.
It was wonderful.
So we have one more exciting adventure. It's an honor for me to introduce our next local treasure, John Babcock. John is an internationally recognized handmade paper artist. In 2014, in our community, he was named Artist of the Year by the Santa Cruz County Arts Commission. Starting out as a printmaker, John fell in love early with the papermaking process. Using paper of his own manufacture, he has discovered and developed ways to use a huge variety of pigmented pulps to build stunningly beautiful works of art. He often gravitates to earth forms for inspiration as he pours the pulp for his designs. A resulting serenity and light reflecting quality of the finished work tends to give his imagery a mystical sense over time. So it's a real pleasure to have John show his process and his beautiful pieces. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Let me get my screen set up here. So good evening. The purpose of my talk today is tonight is I'll give you a general overview of how I got started with my paper explorations and a few projects I've worked on over the years. I don't really work on the paper. My paper is the work. The imagery comes from the feelings I get from the nature around me. And my work is a documentation of feeling. When I first started out as a printmaker and working in deep embossments, I decided that I needed, my paper kept tearing, even though the Arches cover and the Reeves BFK were really high quality French papers. They tore easily when I would put them through the press. So I made, 1973, I made my own sheet of paper out of scrap pulp, not a scrap paper. And I was fascinated by the fact that I actually made my own sheet of paper. And soon, however, that pulp became the medium and the paper became the object. When the pulp is prepared in a Hollander beater, it comes out in a rather viscous, fibrous material. It's very seductive. When I first started, I would carefully and meticulously pat the pulp out on a plastic surface. This was, this piece here is Santa Lucia Mountain Trace I did in 1977. It's 30 by 30. In the collection of the International Paper Company. I did also a whole series of lunar landscapes in the 75, 76, 21 by 21 inches. This was shown at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art in 1976, the first paper show in the United States, the handmade paper object. The following pieces are topographical landscapes. Kind of when you're working on paper, you're working flat, so you kind of walk around a piece. You don't even know which end is up. It's like a map, and so they become landscapes in a kind of a flat form. This piece is called Tehachapi Winter Morning Fisher. Summer Sierra Fall, it's a lamination of two colors to represent the earth. The top surface of this piece is like the skin of the earth. And if you look closely, you'll find the evidence that underneath the skin is a piece of red paper. So just as the earth is a different color underneath its skin. So what I've done here is laminate the two colors together, the two pulps together. So I have red pulp underneath the entire piece. I worked more with, I started heavily pigmenting my work as I went along. This is in Faulted Arch. It's a small piece in the collection of International Paper in Memphis. Crocker Art Museum installation of my Mesa pieces that I look at these pieces like that they're made of pages, and each page tells a story of past time, just as the Grand Canyon, for instance, reveals layers and tells a story. My studio's made up of, I have some equipment in there that makes the pulp, and I have 2 bucket beaters and 2 Hollander beaters. The Hollander beaters in the background are they can make paper from rags. They actually beat the fiber, and the 2 in the foreground, the bucket beater of my own design, and the Maytag, which is a converted washing machine beater that makes about 3 gallons of pulp. I trade strength the mixed paper is strong, and the beaten paper is a lot stronger. The mixed paper is not so strong, and the beaten paper is stronger. And but the beaten paper warps, and so I use mostly mixed. Well, this is when I moved to Swanton Road. My studio was a lot larger, and I was able to make some larger pieces. This is pieces Searching New Kingdoms. It's a collection of the Museum of Art and Design in New York. It was shown in Craft Today USA, and traveled throughout Europe for about 3 years and made in a lot of museums, including the Louvre. I want to go jump forward about 30 years here and show you a little video that I've got put together. And that's what's going to show you is cast paper, cast abaca paper, vat molded paper, fishing line manipulation, and a Japanese process called Hikakakugami. All of these different processes I use in my paper, and I think this video kind of will give you a quick view of the processes, and then we'll go back in time again. A little technical issue. So here I am making the putting down abaca fiber in a cast form, just as you saw in that previous slide, where I cast the paper on the big sheets. So this is abaca fiber cast. I did this. I had to make 128 of these things for a hand paper making magazine, and so I wanted to show you here. I lay out this abaca fiber, and each one's a measured amount. And then what I'm going to do after this is go in and take some vat molded pulp and go over the top of it. Now the vat molded pulp is going to be cotton, and this is abaca. And this is what I do is contrast different types of fibers so that I get certain types of effects. So here we go with a vat molded sheet of paper, and that's laying that on the surface. I look at this as kind of a tablet-like form, a tablet form that tells a story. Here we go with some, with pulling up some gray pulp on a piece of fishing line, and that's how I do a lot of linear stuff in many of my large pieces. You'll see in more of these in how I apply it. Now we're going to switch to Hikakakugami. Okay, so I'm going to take this grid and I'm going to pull up some light gray pulp on this grid. I build these grids out of diffuser plastic that I buy at the hardware store, and make my own grids of all various sizes and shapes. So I'm going to release the pulp that I have on there now, and pushing it down in the water bath, and you can see then that I've transferred this linear fiber. Now linear fiber is going to transmit light differently than just a mixed fiber. So we'll get rid of some of the stuff that I don't want in this image and get into the part that I do want, and we'll transfer this onto the next sheet. Okay, so next I will show you this is one of the ways that I use the fiber going back in time of this is a abaca and cotton and abaca and cotton. And you notice that the way the abaca is light down here and dark up here because it's the same, but it's in relationship to the cotton fiber. So the striations are always changing because the mid-ground abaca is always changing in the light. So I use this technique to throughout my work. This piece here is a photo of this piece at the International Paper Company in New York in the CEO's office there in Manhattan. I did a whole series of poetry of ladder pieces, and this piece was in a show at the American Craft Museum in New York called Poetry of the Physical. I made many of these ladder forms in the 80s, and right here is the angel's footsteps. I'm putting my mark in the paper like I like to do. This is Heaven's Ladder. This is a piece that's in the permanent collection of the Museum of Art and Design in New York. And there it is in my studio in Swanton. Casting paper. This is the way I was doing that in the 80s, casting these forms using the striations of abaca and cotton. Mars X. It's a 60 by 60 foot inch piece in a show in Palm Springs. Night River. Kalamazoo Institute of Art owns this piece. Messenger. It started, Weaver is a kind of interesting piece. They started mixing pulp, mixing cotton and abaca together like a green image, a green bunch of pulp gradation between cotton and abaca, but keeping the color the same, and then alternating the way the fibers work. And that was kind of fun to do that. And here's another piece in that same sort of vein. This is a big puzzle piece where all of these images inside the piece change as the light changes as you walk past it. So there's hidden images of X's and marks and lines and triangles that appear and disappear. And some of these big shapes get larger or smaller depending on how the light hits it. This was inspired by, I love mixing green and red pulp together. And it was inspired by looking at sunsets as I traveled the coast, on the coast in the late afternoon when the sun would, when the red sunlight would hit the green hills. And you really can't figure out what's red and what's green. Pouring pulp. This is a this was something I discovered I could do in the early 90s. So I was at the Southwest School of Art in San Antonio, Texas. I was doing a visiting artist thing there, and we were using mosquito netting, which I'd never seen before. And I realized that I could use the mosquito netting to keep a sheet of paper from sticking to the screen and be able to release it. So I developed a technique where I could pour pulp and release it from the screen and then be able to laminate one sheet on top of another, on top of another. So here is a little quick video of pouring pulp in the screen. I would take the blue pulp on one end and I wanted green at the other. I put it all together. I used a grid just to keep them separated so that I could make it fairly even. I don't always use the grid when I'm pouring pulp, but there's a piece of mosquito netting under this surface that I'll be able to release the surface from the screen. When I get the results I want, I put a piece of mosquito netting over the top of it and I sponge it out. So I'm able to release this now from the screen. So I put my screen on the ground, on the floor of the studio, and move the one of my Formica surfaces into the screen, and I'm able to, it's fairly heavy, but I'm able to do it by myself because those little tables have rollers on them and I just kick them underneath. So I'm sponging out some of the water now, and now I've released the screen. And that's how that works. So this piece is poured piece and it's got 3 laminations. I did a green to gray. I didn't finish it. And then I laminated a light gray on the back side. And I'm working upside down, by the way. So once I start working, I actually don't see the surface of the piece until I'm finished. Well, that's not really true. Sometimes I do because I've developed another technique to do that. But Midnight Crossing on these pieces, I love these garden pieces, I call them. It's like plowing the furrows through the garden, or tracing these lines through this wet viscous pulp. It's time-consuming process and your mind wanders. And while the physical process moves forward, sometimes you might think you are just drawing the ripples in a lake, or perhaps raking a Japanese sand garden, for instance. So this is poured and laminated cotton time garden. Some other poured pieces in the studio. This piece is called Beholder, 2002. The triangles are a symbol for me. A triangle is a symbol over the mountain, and its 3-dimensional version, the pyramid. They've long been associated with spirituality, timelessness, and enlightenment. And I like to use these in my imagery sometimes. This piece has a lot of hidden images, and the whole piece is done with those, what I showed you earlier, with the picking up the pulp on the mosquito, on fishing line, and placing it down one after another and building the piece, building the surface over the top of the pink and yellow board paper. Red Wing. I got involved in a project for making book covers for a book by local poet Gary Young, and so I made four or five of these sheets, and all of them got cut up into small book covers, except for one, which I kept for myself and made into a final piece for me. And it's called New Mexico Reflections. I don't normally work directly on the surface like this, but this was an exception. This is a piece called Victory Song. This was shown at the U.S. Embassy in Tbilisi, Georgia. It's not the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia, put on by the Art and Embassy program in the U.S. Department of State. So it's gone to Tbilisi for about 3 years. Recently, a little more recently anyway, Manjet has a Egyptian story behind it. I saw a show of Egyptian art in San Francisco, and I was fascinated by the Manjets. And the Manjets are these boats that travel up and down the Nile, and the pharaohs used to travel to get to their various constituents. And when they die, of course, the pharaoh is a god, and so Ra, the sun god, travels in a manjet across the sky, actually bringing up the sun every morning. Streamer, here's a new piece, another piece I did at the Museum of Art and History, and the concept was the history of paper making. The yellow at the top represented the Chinese paper where we started paper making 2,000 years ago. It traveled through to Europe. It took about 1,000 years to get to Europe, and then took another 600 years to get over to California, where I made the bottom pieces with my own blue jeans. And so that was this project, 32-foot long pieces. I don't have 32 feet in my studio, so what I had to do was I made the pieces in a water bath here at the far end of the studio, and then I would dry them at this end over here, and then I'd start to roll them up so that I could make to get all 32 feet in. But it was drying at one end and still wet at the other end. I do wet on wet. Here is more of the Hikakakugami and the linear lines that I use for disappearing images and that kind of thing. Slipstream installation, another use of those pieces of paper. I'd like to show you tigers on Mars. A long time, back in the 70s, everybody thought they saw canals on Mars, and they thought they saw pyramids and all kinds of things. And so my mind wandered, and I decided that if we could see pyramids and canals, we could probably see tigers too. And so I made this little story. This piece is, well, you can see how big it is there. It's next to Rabbit in the Moon. And they fold all up into a 12-inch square. And I see them as kind of like pages in a book, because you open it up and fold it out. And so every page tells a story. Here we have a little Hikakakugami line that disappears and appears depending on the light. And I carved in, it's a lamination, so I carved in and produced the gray paper underneath. The gray paper was a special paper that I had made in the Hollander so that it had fold strength. The other parts are cast paper. Here's some more, a piece, Crying Lullabies to Venus, 5 hanging panels and Hikakakugami lines which glisten. The panels are made with abaca and cotton, with the lines of abaca Here's another view of one of the pages. I love the way the cotton pulp just floats on the surface of the abaca, and it always entertains me to see that kind of effect. Here's a shot making the pieces in the studio, and I, you know, on this side, these are all wet pieces because I'm still in the process of putting the lines in. And here it's dry. You notice how much lighter the abaca is and how closer in relationship the cotton and the abaca is in the dry piece. Hokalea. Hokalea is a Polynesian name for Arcturus. And that's the bright star that guided the ancient mariners across the ocean in their double-hulled canoes across the South Pacific. The reason it's important to me is that not only, well, I lived in Hawaii for a bit, but these Polynesian sailors brought trees with them because not only did they populate the islands, they brought the kozo tree. The kozo tree is really special. Not only does it make a world-class paper pulp, but it also is the way you make tapa cloth and the way the Polynesians dress themselves and all. And so it was a real important fiber for them. And I just wanted to celebrate that with this piece of talking about the ocean, the waves, and the vastness of the Pacific. So here I am making the piece in a big water bath in the studio. I'm making that green to blue gradation, just ever so slightly pouring in very carefully to make this big sheet paper. And then I cut it up into strips, and I laminated the strips to a piece of mylar, and I cut the design, the wave form, the wave spirit form that I made. I cut that design with a plotter. And so there it is at the art museum. This was at a show at the mall. So. Poets Corner, various poems and sayings cut into strips. A recent commission of mine in a private commission here in Santa Cruz area. A piece, again, Egyptian in its nature, a tribute to the sun god Ra. And there's a shot of building the piece. And can't, I mean, they're like paintings, but you can't say I painted them, I build them. They're sculptural. I'm actually a sculptor in nature. I just make paintings of sculpture. Here's another piece, so be it, a recent piece. And last year I went to Abacu and Santa Fe and visited some friends there and came out with, inspired these two pieces that are fairly recent for me. This year was our COVID year here, and it didn't bother me too much in that I'm always by myself and working in the studio anyway. And so I was building all of these strips of paper for a new project called Poets, Proverbs, and Songs. It was a series of poetry that I wanted to cut into 10-foot strips I would glue 2 of these strips together to get a 10 or 50, actually 15-foot piece of paper. Firewood. Those who carry firewood for the masses are those who freeze to death in the wind and snow. It's a Chinese proverb passed around on social media in tribute to Dr. Li Wenlong in Wuhan, China. He sent a message on December 30th of last year to a group of fellow doctors, warning them about a possible outbreak of a disease that resembled SARS. He was arrested by the government and put in jail for 4 days. He died of COVID at the age of 33 in February. So I made this piece for him in homage to him. And it's going to be hung with my other pieces. Here's a shot of making this piece. It's really a pretty piece of paper that I made with Hollander beaten pulp because I needed a strong fiber. So it has a bit of fold strength and all. And so a couple shots of that piece on the floor and some of the long hanging pieces I don't have time to show today. This is the last piece I worked on and this is a Pablo Neruda poem. I framed it out in bamboo and wood. I had planned on just using an excerpt from the poem for one of my banners, but I loved the poem so much that I had to cut the whole thing. So this is, now we will all count to 12 and we will all keep still. That's it. Thank you very much for watching and see you down the road.
Oh, so lovely.
So much. That was so fabulous. Oh my God. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
John, I'm struck by the subtlety and the restraint that you have as you work, and the resulting pieces have so much emotion, so much feeling and kindness in them. It's really, they're lovely, very lovely.
Thank you.
Yes.
And John, you know what? I think they're really smart pieces too. I mean, I love the beauty and the color and the shapes, everything, but I love the intelligence behind them too. They're so amazing. And John, I had a question.
Go.
On the piece that's about Hawaii.
Oh yeah.
That you made. I mean, the shadow from that piece is just incredible. Did you imagine that ahead of time, or did you just assume there might be a little shadow here and there?
I think I had started cutting some of those poet pieces first, and I realized the shadow on the wall was fascinating, and
yeah, it's just powerful.
And so that got me started thinking about trying to get a piece that I really wanted to get the feeling of the ocean. I wanted to get a repetitive, the waves, and the Pacific is a Pacific Ocean. It isn't a wild place like the Atlantic. And so the waves go boom, boom, boom. I wanted to get that repeat over and over again. And God, can you imagine those sailors traveling
Oh,
just a star and a sun to guide them. And they found those, they'd go from island to island, and there was hundreds and hundreds of miles in between. And they just went there. They just figured it out. I the least I can do is do a piece to homage to them. And like I said, I love the Kozo. The Kozo fiber is incredible stuff. I get to use it once in a while. It's a lot of work because you have to I buy the Kozo in it's strips of bark, and I buy it. It comes from Thailand, and I buy it and cook it outside in caustic soda, and then I beat it by hand with a mallet. It takes a long time to make all that pulp too, so there's a lot of love that goes into those pieces.
Say this, that I don't know what's ever going to happen to Open Studio in the future. I mean, something it will, but if that you do an amazing Open Studio and people can really see what you are doing there. And so I recommend that should be one of your number one things.
John, I can't stop thinking about the piece you showed briefly at the end on the doctor at Wuhan, China, because I immediately felt, and it's getting stronger for me every minute, that piece is a parable for our time.
Yes.
Well, I break up when I talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you captured the spirit of where we are. I compliment you for that.
Yes.
I'd like to do one for John Prine too.
Yeah. I wish you could.
Oh, yes, do.
Well, if there's a way I can help cultivate that inspiration, I will.
Thanks. Walter has helped me in researching Pablo Neruda and a number of the different authors. So I owe Walter a bit of thanks there for all the help he's given me.
Well, another gallery tour will be fine for your gallery. You know, that's a special treat. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
I have a question for you, John.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the museum show where you had the long stringers, it was opposite the wall of the cutout, the piece that's behind you kind of thing. It looked like you had built a box around the top of those ribbons and put lights in it or something. I couldn't really tell what, did you do something special?
Are you talking about the stairwell piece?
I'm not talking about the stairwell piece, the one that was in the room with the larger piece of the wavy.
That's that sculpture. Okay, so in that upstairs gallery and the third floor, they it was an old jail, right? So when my friend Chuck Hilger got that thing, started putting that museum together, and so they never took out the skylight, and the skylight in that place is devastating for controlling the light in the gallery. So I talked the gallery, the gallery technician into blocking out the skylight, and so we built a box. We covered half the skylight, and I just built a square box and used the light of the skylight to come down through that column of paper.
Oh, that was very clever and it was very powerful, the way it lit those streamers.
It's kind of fun, huh? Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for any of the artists? Thanks to all three of you. John, that was a wonderful presentation. Randie, yours too. And Heidi, it was lovely.
Heidi, just
Thank
loved
you
it.
so much.
Lovely, lovely.
Big
right.
round of applause for you
Thank
guys.
you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So we're hoping we'll have another art salon in February. So we'll keep you posted on that.